Hello, everyone. As you get logged in, you'll see a survey on your screen. If you could take a second to fill it out, that'd be great. You can also drop into the chat where you're calling in from, and we'll get started in just a minute. As we wait, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Madison Burnett. I'm a BCBA. I lead our professional development program, and I'll be available to support you throughout today's webinar. In addition to that role, I work alongside other BCBAs on our clinician-led recruitment team. I support in the effort of recruiting quality professionals to join our team. And if you are interested in joining our team, you can indicate so in the post-webinar survey at the end of this webinar, or you can email careers@manhattanpsychologygroup.com. All right. I see we do have quite a few returning attendees, but some new ones too.
Olga, so cool to see you. Hi, everyone.
All right. I'm going to leave that open for a little bit longer, but we're thrilled to have everybody to join us today. Okay, now to tell you a little bit about Manhattan Psychology Group. We were established in 2011, and we have continued to grow our team consisting of skilled adult and child psychologists, neuropsychologists, behavior analysts, special educators, licensed social workers, and behavior interventionists. As a team, we're committed to wraparound care, which includes our wide range of services from mental health and testing to ABA and educational services. This holistic approach allows us to address various needs and challenges with compassion and care, and we provide services to our clients at our Upper West Side and Long Island City offices, in home, school, and clinic-based settings, as well as through telehealth. Our team is committed to serving individuals, couples, and families of all ages in diverse settings. We're also pleased to offer these free monthly webinars to parents and professionals where we can continue to learn and foster meaningful connections. Our vision at MPG is to create a future where individuals and their families feel supported, connected, and empowered. Our mission is to provide multidisciplinary integrated support for individuals and their families who experience mental health, behavioral, and educational challenges. Okay, now for some housekeeping information on CEUs. For those seeking CEUs for this presentation, you'll need to collect the code words stated and complete the post-webinar survey. We will verbally say them, and once we say them, we will not be able to come back. We will send a post-webinar quiz in the last 10 minutes of the presentation for you to get your CEU, or if we haven't gotten to the last code word by then we will hold off until sending it until that is said. We encourage your participation in the chat today during today's presentation. I know Shane has some interactive pieces to his presentation, so we're excited to see your engagement. We will be leaving the chat open throughout the entire webinar, but if you do have any questions, please post them in the Q&A so that we can be sure that they're seen. All right, now I would love to introduce today's speaker. Shane Spiker is a BCBA in Ormond Beach, Florida. He's received his master's in psychology in 2012 and his second master's in applied psychology in 2016. In May of 2019, he graduated with his PhD in clinical psychology with a concentration on instructional design. He has been providing services in the field of ABA since 2010, with the majority of his experience with autistic learners and other disabilities. Shane specializes in working with teens and adults with dangerous problem behaviors, sexual behavior, and medically complex individuals in the home and community-based settings. Primarily, Shane serves as the clinical training and safety director at PBS Core. Shane previously served as the vice president of the sexual behavior research and practice through ABAI, and he has written and published several articles related to behavior analysis and practice. Additionally, he serves as the co-instructor for Florida at the Florida Institute of Technology, Arizona State University, and Regis College, where he teaches the graduate level coursework. He enjoys reading and appreciates a really good cup of coffee. And now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Shane.
All right. Thank you all for being here. Super stoked. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared so y'all can see. And we'll get that going. So we got that. There we go. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I can actually see the chat. So all right, close that out and we should be good. I'll turn that off as well. So we got that. There we go. Okay, cool. So hi, everyone. Yeah, there we go. FIT folks. Yeah, yep. Hello, hello, hello. Nice to see y'all. Okay, so thank you all for being here. I am so excited. I love talking about supervision. I love talking about self-care. I love talking about all these things. And I love when I can bring it together. And so today we are really going to talk about the supervisor and their role in creating a culture of quality of work life and what that means. So hopefully you find this useful. Hopefully you find this helpful. Hopefully you find this insightful. But more than anything, I just want you to take away kind of some self-reflection. The other thing too, I'm going to tell everybody is that I am really, really, really fond of discussions. So whatever you want to throw in the chat, whatever you want to say, I'm totally good with. I mean, give me constructive feedback. If you have constructive feedback, if you have questions, ask questions. I'm going to keep the Q&A poll open as well, so I can see that and try to answer as I go if you don't feel comfortable answering or asking out loud. But this is going to be beneficial for everybody if you're interactive. So it does not bother me. Ask questions, all that fun stuff. So I do want to take a moment of gratitude to say thank you, just kind of share. First of all, thank you to MPG for having me here. I'm coming to you from Miami, Florida right now. So I promise you this is not what my office looks like. I don't live out of a hotel room. I just happen to be in a hotel room in the middle of FABA here in Miami. So if you are here at FABA, come and say hi to me. I am walking around, probably lumbering around like I do as a giant person that I am. But just a huge moment of gratitude to have to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you all for taking the time and giving me your attention, because I know your attention is valuable. Time is a commodity that we cannot get back. So I really do appreciate that you're taking any sort of time with me to talk about any of this stuff, and hopefully have a good time. I'm going to give everybody fair warning. I use some profanity. So that's going to come up. I'm going to try to do my best not to use too much profanity, but I do use bad words. And if you have a problem with bad words, I'm sorry, but I will do my best to kind of avoid that. I'm a little bit sarcastic too, so here we go. CEs, I believe Madison's got that information that she can share with y'all so that you've got that. But there's going to be code words, and there'll be a survey towards the end that you can enter those code words in. So, all right. So, yay, profanity. All right, here we go. So, this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm not going to read the objectives because I think reading the objectives doesn't really help. But if you want the PowerPoint, we'll make sure to share so you all have that information. I'm going to start off with kind of the idea that we as supervisors have a responsibility to create an environment that benefits the people that we supervise. So I want to really unpack this for a second. When we're supervising people, we are creating a learning context. And when we create a learning context, we are supposed to be enriching the environment so that learning context is effective. Supervision is a teaching, learning context. And as supervisors, we are responsible for making sure that that supervisee, that trainee that we're working with, is benefiting from what we're doing. If they're not benefiting, if they're not gaining skills, if they are not satisfied with their supervisory experience, then we have some obligation to kind of course correct that, right? And so as we kind of look at this, and as you start to evaluate your own supervision practices and what that looks like and what that means, I want you to take a second and kind of inventory how you supervise. I want you to think about how you supervise and what that looks like and whether or not you are creating the learning context that your supervisee deserves and that they need, okay? So I don't want it to be one of those things where you're like, well, this is what my supervisor did, so we're going to do it that way, because that's bullshit. We have to do better than our supervisors did for us. And I think it's really important to kind of look at that, right? So as we unpack this, think about it like that. We are supervising in a teaching context, and our goal is to improve the lives of our supervisees so they can go on to improve the lives of the people that they serve later. So I want to open up with talking about this idea of servant leadership. As a supervisor, I tend to subscribe to the idea of servant leadership. And what this is if you've never heard this phrase or this term, it talks about a leadership style that prioritizes growth while being an empowerment. So, and I really love that. Growth being that we're gaining skills, we're gaining new skills, we're getting out of our comfort zone. Well-being, the person's taken care of, they are happy, relaxed, and engaged while they're learning, right? And empowerment, we are teaching them to advocate for themselves, and we're empowering them to make decisions and own their supervisory relationship. I think a lot of us have probably had the experience. I didn't really have this experience, but I know some people have, where their supervisor has had like an ironclad grip on their supervisory experience. So you didn't really get a lot of the kind of maybe the autonomy that you needed in supervision. But I tend to subscribe to the idea of like, let's do what's useful and what makes sense for you, and also work towards goals. And we'll talk about that quality of work life piece as we kind of unpack this as we go. But when we start looking at this, there are 4 consistent elements of servant leadership: flexibility, empathy, stewardship, and listening. Now you might be going, these are not behavior analytic. And I'm going to say, who cares? But what I am going to say is, like, let's unpack them and give you some conceptual ideas and like some behaviors that you can engage in that underneath these banners and these elements you can do as a supervisor that are pretty useful and pretty easy if you pay attention to them. Behavior analysts tend to be, and you'll see this as this comes up, behavior analysts tend to be very solution focused. So somebody, and I just got to see an amazing talk this morning from Dr. Nasia Circione Ulezi, and she talked about this idea of listening for, listening about and listening for. And kind of, we're going to talk about what it means to listen for, which means like we're going to kind of like unpack the idea of like, I'm listening to be supportive of you, not to find a solution, because we don't always need to find a solution. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. So when we look at supervisor behaviors underneath this, let's first look at flexibility. Flexibility means that we can change or adapt. Do we have generalizable skills to apply to new or novel scenarios? I like that. We can offer solutions to challenges that arise. So a challenge comes up and then we have the opportunity to either problem solve or to offer different solutions to that person if they need it. We can also create new pathways for task engagement. So we can create some spaces where the person can learn new activities, they can get access to new skills, they can access new people as part of their reinforcing that reinforcing space. And so we can kind of create this unique space for supervision. I don't know if y'all know this, but there is no guideline for how supervision should be done, right? We have the 8-hour course. We know what our documentation is, but there is no standardized curriculum from the BACB. The BACB does not require us to do supervision in a certain way, to meet certain hours, to do something like that, right? So what we can do is we can go back and say, you know what? We are making it up as we go. The rules don't matter, right? I mean, some of the rules matter, don't get me wrong. But like we can go in and we can like actually design our own supervision. We have the flexibility to do that. We don't need to be rigid about this. So that's just something to think about as we kind of unpack this. Oh yeah, and Molly, I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Yeah, I've got a good phrase for that to give everybody too. So that's beautiful, right? Now we can do empathy. The thing is like empathy is this kind of nebulous thing that, when we talk about it, everybody goes, ugh, gross, ugh. But the truth is like, what we're saying here is like we make statements of concern, we make statements of understanding, and it's not solution focused. So, and we do preemptive adjustments to the environment. What I mean by that is, okay, let's say that, oh, this person has had a really hard time. Like they've had a really hard time at home. Something's been going on. They've been sick. So what do? We modify the environment to make their work life easier and work a little better. That's an empathetic way of taking care of your employees. That is a caring gesture that we can do as supervisors. And that's easy. We go, hey, you know what? I'm not going to give you this task today because I know that you're having a hard time. Why would I stress you out more? It's not necessary, right? So empathy is those types of things. Stewardship talks about the idea that we are setting professional goals. We are working with that person. We're pacing goals. And we are also in the space where we are never asking someone to do something that we wouldn't do ourselves. I think this is critically important for supervisors. I think a lot of supervisors go, hey, I got my BCBA certification. I don't need to do this anymore. When the truth is like, hey, I'm going to step in with you. I'm going to do this alongside you. I'm going to do this when you won't do this because I'm willing to I'm showing you that I'm willing to kind of quote unquote get my hands dirty, but I'm not above doing the work that I'm asking you to do just because I'm a supervisor. That's so important for showing that your supervisees that you care, your trainees that you care, because they know that you are willing to do the work with them and that you are not willing to ask them to do all kinds. I mean, to be fair, I will ask people who are comfortable working with vomit-related behaviors to go do that because I will start gagging. I'll try it, but I'll go, okay, here's how we, I can't do it. So like vomit's a line that I draw, but I would still at least make the attempt. You know what I'm saying? All right. And then listening. Listening, we talk about is like, sometimes we have to learn to listen without responding. Going back to what Molly was saying earlier, are you seeking comfort or solutions? What a great way to set expectations for a conversation. This person's having a hard time. Do you want to vent to me because maybe you got a solution or you're going to get there? Or do you want me to help you find and problem solve this? Like, what space are you in right now? Because those are two very different conversations, right? There's one conversation that goes, I hear you. That sounds really hard. It sounds like you're having a hard time. It sounds like that's a real struggle. It sounds like that's unfair. you know, it's going to be okay. Let me get you, like, let me help you through that, right? Where solutions is, that sounds like a really hard situation. What are some ideas to get out of it, right? Because some people will say, oh yeah, the best way out is through. And that's fair, but sometimes people have to vent on the way through, okay? And then you can reflect too. Those are basic acknowledgments of statements. Like, listening is a skill that is taught in counseling that behavior analysts desperately need. We need that skill so bad, okay? So just some things to think about there. Now, I'm going to talk about this idea of well-being, because the ultimate goal here is talking about quality of work life, right? What does quality of work life mean? Well, in order to understand quality of work life, we have to understand what well-being is. And well-being research and behavior analysis is starting to pick up a little bit. You see folks like Denavi, and you see Slowiak, and you see DeLongcamp, all these folks that are doing this really cool work around well-being and what it looks like. Okay. And so as we start to really kind of unpack that, I'm going to make the argument that well-being is equal parts desired behaviors that we want to see, contacting enough reinforcement, a culture that supports well-being. So what I'm saying is, as a supervisor, we are arranging contingencies that promote well-being, values to work towards. We are all working towards a shared value, which is, you know, the client's well-being most of the time, but we have to kind of unpack that a little bit. And then environmental and antecedent changes, right? So well-being is an outcome related to desired behaviors that contact enough reinforcement and a culture that supports it, while we're working towards, we have committed actions towards those values in an environment that shifts and changes to meet those needs, right? And that's a pretty complicated thing to think about. But ultimately, well-being is how I'm feeling about a certain situation, and that's not entirely behavioral, so we got to conceptualize it a little bit. How many of you have seen me talk about self-care? Has anybody here ever come see me talk about self-care at all? Okay, I see a couple hands raised. Yeah, if you've seen me talk about self-care, you're probably really sick of it, because I talk about it all the time. But here's the thing, here's the truth of it. Self-care is ultimately a domain of behaviors, right? When we talk about self-care domains, we're talking about domains of behavior, separate behaviors, unique behaviors that operate inside of a domain, and that specifically might apply to behaviors that you engage in for your physical well-being, behaviors that you engage in that are related to your spiritual well-being. And when I say spiritual well-being, you know, you're talking about like going to church, practicing your faith, whatever that is, practicing whatever spirituality you have. I don't have one in terms of like a formal religion, but I like to go to the beach and kind of like ponder the universe. Maybe with mushrooms, maybe not, but the idea of like kind of like connecting with the world around you and having that, right? Occupational and educational well-being, emotional well-being, social well-being, whatever that might be, all of those different scenarios, all of those include behaviors underneath that, right? That we engage in towards an overall idea of well-being and underneath that. So when we talk about supervisors tend to be most responsible, I should say, for occupational and educational well-being. We are your direct supervisor at work. Now, this does apply to like psychological, emotional well-being in all those spaces, but the truth is that we have a direct line and almost direct control over occupational and educational well-being. So if we don't account for that in some sort of meaningful way, and we don't attend to those behaviors that make it so that person is doing well, enjoying themselves, contacting reinforcement in the occupational and educational spaces, then we're gonna actually burn people out pretty quickly. So let me give a quick example. Like, let me ask a quick question, I should say. How many of you have been at a job and don't answer if it's like gonna affect your job adversely? Like, okay, if you got a supervisor here, don't answer this like the way. But maybe you had a job that you're unhappy in, and so you started looking at new work opportunities, or how many of you considered going to get a PhD because you're like, I'm sick of this. I'm gonna go get my doctorate. Okay. Yeah, I see some folks go, me, yeah, yeah, lots of hands raised, right? And that's perfectly acceptable, right? Or you might be really happy in your job, right? Think about this. How many of you are here, you consider career changes? Yeah, I see that. How many of you had the experience of like, are you here because you want to learn more, or are you here because you're just checking a box for your certification? You don't have to answer that out loud. I don't want you to go like and tell me like, yeah, you're here just because you're checking a box. That would just be a bummer. Yeah, and so, yeah, and most of us are probably here to learn more, right? And that's kind of cool. Okay, great. I'm glad you guys are checking boxes. That's fine too. But the thing is when we kind of unpack this, okay, when we start looking at this, that's attending to a certain level of well-being. Because maybe you're at a job and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, and you're getting stuck. And you're kind of like, this is boring. I don't want to do this anymore, right? I'm going to go work with dolphins because I'm tired of getting bit. or something like that, right? Or maybe you've had the experience of going like, I like to read research because I like to learn more, or something along those lines. All of that stuff is beautiful. Like, learn all the things, right? I'm so glad y'all are here for learning. That reinforces me, okay? So thank you for being here for learning. It also just reinforces me that y'all are here, so I'll take that too. So when we unpack this and we kind of look at all of this, right? We are really looking at this idea of occupational and educational well-being. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Victoria, I'm telling you, we're here, right? I'm from Florida. I think everybody in Florida that's a behavior analyst wanted to be a marine biologist at some point in time. I was almost a marine biologist for a little bit. So, all right. Yes, there's a lot of supervision content out there too, for sure. Love you, Olga. You're so good to me. All right, so let's talk about this idea though. So there are some people that really, really, really want to advance, right? And we call those folks superstars. But has anybody, I mean, I won't ask the question. If you have not read Radical Candor, you should go read that. And I'm going to base a lot of what I'm talking about from some of the content in that space. There is this idea of employees and supervisees. It's a great book. I love it. You got the rock star and the superstar. The rock star is, and this is referring to people who are exceptional performers overall, right? And we're going to kind of unpack this. Every organization, every space you work in, every trainee that you work with is either going to be a rock star or superstar. Most likely your trainees are going to be superstars. They want to kind of advance, but you're going to have some folks that are pretty good with status quo. And that's kind of the way it goes, right? So when you are designing your pathway towards your educational and occupational well-being, you should consider whether or not you are a rock star or whether you're a superstar. I myself am a rock star. I'm perfectly happy with where I'm at. I love the work I do. I get to be creative. I get to learn new things. I get to talk to all you wonderful folks. I get to do all these really cool things that in other jobs I might not be able to do. And right now it's filling my cup. It doesn't mean it's always going to fill my cup, but right now it fills my cup and that's perfectly acceptable for me. I am perfectly happy in that space. So I might consider myself a rock star in that regard. Not like a rock star like signing autographs. I mean, I will sign autographs if I run into you, but I don't need to, right? That's not what I'm saying. So let's unpack both of these. First, we've got this idea of the rock star. The rock star is an employee who is solid in their role. This is a supervisor, a trainee. It is Radical Candor, Charisse. So Radical Candor, and I'll reference it later in the book or in the talk as well. So the rock star, right? The rock star is a solid employee. They like where they're at. They do not want to advance. So real quick show of hands, how many of you would kind of say that you're in a rock star space? You're really happy in your position and you don't want to change it. You're not interested in advancing. I see a lot of folks that are saying, yeah. Great. I love that. I love that so much, right? Some folks are like, that's what they do. So when you're supervising people, think about this. When you're supervising people, some of the people you're supervising are not interested at all in advancing. They do not care. They do not care. They do not want it. There is nothing interesting about becoming a clinical director, right? Nobody, I can tell you right now, Sabrina, I love that you're here in Miami too right now. So I can tell you right now, one of the things that I love where I'm at, I never want to open a clinic. I'm always, some people actively avoid being superstars. Because what does it mean? Being a superstar means that you're going to be doing more work sometimes. That's okay. Some people like that, right? I'm perfectly good with where I'm at because my needs are filled. And we'll talk about what that looks like. So rock stars typically don't seek advancement, but they do require challenge. And this is something that's really important. They're not people that like to be stagnant. Just because you're a rock star doesn't mean you're stagnant or sedentary. Like you are wanting to learn, you're wanting to grow inside of your position. You're wanting to develop new skills and gain new skills and all that stuff. You want to do better at your job. You want to get really, really good at your role, right? So the thing about this is the rock stars don't get a lot of praise and kudos because they're not advancing. Usually the people that are advancing are the ones that are getting all the praise, all the kudos, all the people going like, oh yeah, good job. Congrats on your promotion. Nobody's saying congrats on keeping your job. So they lose out on social praise, social reinforcers and stuff like that. Like they just get their yearly evaluations and it's like, okay, so things are okay, right? So that's what the rock star does. The superstar though, is somebody who wants to accelerate in their career. Hey, listen, Nicole, listen, there are some areas I'm a rock star and some areas I'm a superstar, right? The superstars are people that want to accelerate their career, or like, and this is usually your trainees. The trainees, they are gaining your supervision hours. They want to be BCBAs. They're not collecting hours just because they like numbers. They're collecting hours because they're trying to become the next level. And then after that, there's another level after that, if that's what they think, right? So the superstar is somebody who's accelerating their career. They're doing more. They're trying to advance. For me, I used to be a superstar. I used to want to accelerate on that linear, and that's what I was saying, Hannah, too. I was too when I was younger. So like my thought is like, okay, so I used to want to accelerate in a linear fashion, right? So I work at a company. I applied to be a clinical director at one point in time. I was a BCBA, and then I was a lead analyst, and then I was a regional coordinator, and then the clinical director role opened up, and I was like, I'm going to do that. And then I didn't get the role, and I was like, that was a blow to my ego, right? But the thing that I learned was like, if I would have gotten that clinical director role, I would have failed miserably because I am terrible at that kind of thing. I don't like rules. I don't like guidelines. I don't want to work with insurance companies. I don't want to do any of that stuff. So I learned that that was not the role for me later, but I had been oriented to this linear advancement place. Like I was not even thinking about, lateral movements. And ultimately that's what I did. I had a lateral move to a different role. And that was the best possible thing that could have happened for me. Because I realized that there are some roles that are just not cut out for me. So when you're working with superstars, it's important. Listen, I'm telling you, Alexa, that's what I'm just getting at, right? So the idea here, and I think it's really important to know that when you're looking at superstars, it's important to have conversations with your superstars to make sure that they are advancing in the way that they want to advance, right? Like I wanted to advance. I loved advancing. I loved finding new roles and new opportunities, but it wasn't because I wanted the position or the power. It was because I wanted new learning opportunities. So you know what? Put me in a position where I have new learning opportunities and I'm going to be satisfied forever. I've been in the same position for like 6 years now and I love it. I never get sick of it. It's changed, but I love it, right? There you go. It's still doing superstar, so I don't get midlife crisis. Hey, there you go. I think it's fair. And I think it's okay. If you're happy where you're at, you don't need to advance. That's perfectly fine too. But what I'm saying is if you are supervising people, you need to know whether or not somebody is a rock star or superstar. You need to know whether or not somebody wants to advance or they're happy where they're at. You need to know if they are happy where they're at, if they're getting their needs met inside of that circle. Because if they're getting their needs met, then they're going to be happy. But if they're not getting their needs met, they're going to find those opportunities in other places. And that's when you start losing your trainees, losing your employees, losing the people that you're supervising. You lose them to other contingencies. So as a supervisor, you're responsible for these contingencies. You can control these contingencies because I don't know if y'all know this, behavior analysis is a fairly new field when it comes to active practice. We can kind of make it all up. Just saying, we can kind of make it all up. We can kind of make it up as we go. We've got a lot of room right now because there's not a lot of regulations and guidelines on how we do our work and how we run our businesses, right? So maybe think about that a little bit when you're supervising people. So this brings us to the conversation about occupational well-being. Occupational well-being is when we engage in behavior that makes it so that we can support a good quality of life. More specifically, we're talking about a good quality of work life, okay? So our goal as supervisors is to not only ourselves engage in occupational well-being, and that might mean quit your job, okay? That might be the thing. You go, you know what? This is not for me. I don't get along with my supervisor. My cup is not being filled. My mental health is not doing well. My job sucks, right? I'm not saying quit your jobs. Don't go out there. Don't tender your resignations and go out there and be like, Shane told me to quit. I don't want those emails from your bosses, okay? I'm not going to answer them. I'm going to blame you. It's not me. But my point is more than anything, looking at this idea of when we engage in self-care at work, what we're doing is we're trying to improve our work life. And there's a lot of different ways that we do that. Our goal is to engage in responses that improve our well-being. And as supervisors, our goal is to engage in behavior that promotes that well-being for our supervisees, our trainees, our employees as well. We have some control over that, right? So when we focus on skills that improve job satisfaction, or we focus on goals, all that does is it reduces burnout, it makes employees happier, it keeps employees with you, it keeps trainees with you, and ultimately it improves the outcomes of your learners. Everybody benefits from having a good role at work, right? Everybody benefits from feeling good at work. And so I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we go, okay? So I want to do a quick self-reflection practice. I want to kind of see how everybody's feeling about this. Again, if you're going to answer a question that's going to get you in trouble at work, do not answer it. Okay? Because that's the last thing I want is to cause you some political problems at work. But a question I would have is, what does occupational well-being mean to you? What kinds of behaviors do you display that foster occupational well-being? And this can be 1 to 2 words or a sentence and all that. And then what kinds of behaviors do you see in others that foster occupational well-being? So, enjoying work on a daily basis. Yeah. So like, that's what it means. That's what we're looking at, right? It means enjoying work, having healthy and functional work-life balance, right? Demetria. Yep, absolutely. Boundaries, Nicole. We do not talk about boundaries enough. Absolutely. Calm, peace, collected. Yeah. Stability, community. I'm going to try to read as many as I can. We've got like 400 people here, so I'm going to try to read as many as I can as we go. So please don't think that I'm skipping you. Open communication, taking breaks, appropriate boundaries, healthy work-life balance, occupational well-being, making jokes while working. I love that. I make jokes while working all the time. It gets me in trouble. One of my friends, it doesn't get me in trouble, but like I do boo a friend of mine at work, and that is really funny to me. Psychological safety, self-reflection, yeah, and support from the company, right? Plenty of PTO. Spend time researching to help behaviors. Yeah, I mean, mindfulness, delegating, ensuring that I take on roles that feed my soul. Absolutely, Leslie. Not going over your caseload, or even setting a caseload boundary, right? Retention and growth if you're supervising people. Leaving work at work. This is what I'm saying. Like when we start talking about this, like y'all are probably talking about this and this sounds really nice, but I can probably, taking time to be creative. I love that, Carol, right? So thinking about this and kind of unpacking this and having positive relationships with people at work, all of this stuff is really good stuff, right? And why are we talking about this? Because this stuff is important and we value this. And all this stuff would make our work lives better if we're doing this. Transparency, Dimitri, I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Freedom from toxicity. Ah, yes, Olga. Mwah. Chef's kiss on that. I love it. Right? So as we start looking at this and we start unpacking what occupational well-being means, I think it's important as you go through all of these to learn that everybody's got a different idea of what it looks like. Nicole, working for an ethical company is aligned with my areas of clinical interests. That setting yourself up to work at a place that aligns with your values, good Lord. If that is not the ultimate way to get occupational well-being, I don't know what is, right? Rejection of micromanagement. We stop that at the door, right? We don't do that bullshit here, right? So that's the thing. Is like when we start looking at occupational well-being, it's different for every single person you work with. Now, you're supervising multiple people. You have multiple employees that you supervise. What does that mean for them? What are they doing? What does occupational well-being look like for them? And if you've never asked them, this is probably a good exercise to start building rapport so you can get an idea of what they think occupational well-being is and whether or not you as a supervisor are doing all the things that are helpful for them to gain that skill, to gain that well-being, to gain that quality outcome. Job crafting. Amy, I'm going to talk about job crafting. Oh, I love job crafting. It's one of my coolest. It's actually how I got my job. I'm an example of how job crafting works. I was not happy in one of my roles, and I wrote up my job description and I said, this is what I want to do. And I was very fortunate that the people I work with were like, yeah, you can do that. Here you go. I designed my own job. So it was really, really cool when I got to do that. So sometimes you just got to take the chance, you know? All right. So when we talk about occupational well-being, I think there are a couple things. And I think a lot of times we look at hierarchies, right? We look at like the individual, we look at like maybe regional or clinical spaces, like whatever that might look like. And then we look at the organization and we kind of look at that in that order, right? Is the person getting what they need? Is the region getting what they need? Is the organization getting what they need? We did not do a secret word. Madison, do you want me to say one out loud?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's say the secret word is Miami, because that's where I'm at right now. Miami. So M-I-A-M-I, Miami. All right, cool. So thank you for that prompt. I appreciate that, Nancy. Okay, so I don't think it's case sensitive. I think it's fine. All right, so.
It'll be multiple choice, so
okay,
no worry about spelling or anything.
Okay, good. Multiple choice. There you go. So you don't have to worry about entering anything like that at all. Good. All right, cool. So occupational well-being, we tend to look at it as a hierarchy, but the truth is it's kind of more like a machine that operates together. So it looks more like this. It's kind of these things that operate with one another, that influence one another. So if there's organizational changes, it impacts your site, and that site is impacting your individual. If your individuals are not happy, then it impacts your sites, and that site impacts the organization. So it's all the blended stuff together, right? Yeah, Miami, M-I-A-M-I, Miami. Yep. So let's unpack this, right? Let's look at this idea. So occupational well-being is interconnected. There are contingencies, there are meta contingencies, there are all these things that are influenced together, they're tied together, they're linked together, they cannot be extracted from one another, because what happens at the organization does bleed down into the individual and vice versa. It's all interrelated. But here's what you look at, right? So for the individual, there are individual contingencies that influence our actions. On the regional level, there's unique work cultures. Like you're like, if you've ever worked at a chain restaurant, like I used to work at Starbucks, that's something that like it was kind of a mess, right? Like, because I've worked at different Starbucks and every store was different. So that's kind of an example of regional things, right? So every store operated differently, and there was a different culture and different guidelines and different managers and stuff like that, and it was a mess. But then organizationally, something would be passed down from the organization, it would come down to the sites, and it would like just kind of cause a ruckus. So the overall company culture matters, right? We want to work at places that we like. We want to work at places that we enjoy. We want that to kind of trickle down. Part of how that works is that if we as supervisors are not kind of creating that culture, and we're not working with the organization to shape that culture, it can be a real problem. And it can actually be detrimental to any sort of occupational well-being that we're trying to put in place for our learners. So, and our learners being our supervisees, our trainees, our employees. So it's all interconnected, and we have to understand that if we're going to analyze that and actually intervene on it too. So that's something to think about as well. Now, the thing that we're looking at here too, when we talk about well-being, we are talking about this idea of outcome. So where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is there is not a linear pathway for your career. There's not a linear pathway for your trainee's career. There's not a linear pathway for any of these careers. And it's important that if you do have a linear pathway, that's fine. If you don't, that's also okay too. There's no like, nobody was born with a handbook on how to be human, right? And a lot of this stuff, yeah, and there's some biases, right? The secret word is for the CEs. So it's linear pathways. There can be a lot of barriers too, right, Dolly? So like there can be racial biases. Organizations can have that. They can have that in leadership. And there's a lot of things that can get in the way too. And it's important for us to be able to recognize that as leaders, as organization, to see if that's getting in the way of creating that stuff too. No, linear pathways is referring to the like career trajectory. So what we're looking at is like, so you have a career trajectory where you are moving up in a linear fashion, like kind of moving up the ladder, you'll hear. I can't repeat the word anymore, I don't think, right, Madison?
No, and again, it is multiple choice, so you won't need to worry about spelling or anything like that.
All right, cool. All right. So when it comes to outcomes, though, when it comes to all the outcomes, we are looking at this idea of behaviors for change. So if we want good occupational well-being, we have to look at behavior changes, and we have to look at what we can do. Now, first of all, we can assess. And as supervisors and employers, we can assess our supervisees and our trainees to see what they're doing and what that looks like, right? So when I'm assessing behavior and I'm looking at all these things, I'm also looking at educational well-being. So it's not just like, is my job cool? It's also, am I educationally or intellectually stimulated? And when I talk about educational well-being, I'm talking about self-care behaviors that support intellectual stimulation. A lot of times people leave jobs not because their work sucks, but because at the end of the day, the thing that's going on, the problem is they're not intellectually stimulated. They're bored out of their minds. That's why people go and get doctorates. That's why people look for other opportunities to be creative, to do different things, right? And so what I say to everybody is spend some time looking at what makes you intellectually stimulated. Spend some time looking at what gets your brain going. Like I like to attend CEs, and I like to attend topics that I have no idea about. So I like to learn more. I'm planning on attending an AI talk while I'm here because I want to know a whole lot. So now I think it's also important to look at kind of who we are outside of behavior analysis. So like in learning things that are not behavior analytic. So as an example, maybe, I don't know about y'all, I like to learn about things like marine biology and marine life. I like to learn about history. So like educational well-being is not just about your job, because I think it's really important to remember that you're not a behavior analyst only, right? You are a multitude of things, okay? And because you are a multitude of things with multitudes of interests, it's important to continue to stimulate in other ways. I like to cook. I like to learn how to cook. I've been doing that more recently. So a lot of times what happens is people tend to burn out because you get so in the weeds about being a behavior analyst. And let's be honest, like sometimes you'll go places and like being a behavior analyst is a little bit culty, right? And so we got to get out of that a little bit. It's totally okay to read stuff that's not behavior analytic. It's okay to read things that are fiction. It's okay to do things and learn things that are not behavior analytic. That is okay. Okay. Like right now, I'm getting my certification to be a certified sex educator. Why am I doing that? Because I like to learn things and I want to do different things sometimes. And that's perfectly okay. Right. So learn in all the spaces. Learn in all the spaces. Somebody said, I feel like there isn't enough time in the day to do these things. I need my sleep. No, Sarah, that's fair. That's fair. So let's talk about self-reflection real quick. Like, what do you want to learn more of in behavior analysis? What do you want to learn more of outside of behavior analysis? And what are those things that are intellectually stimulating for you? And I want you to keep this in mind that like we're talking about this so that you can reflect on this, so that when you bring this to your trainees and your employees, that you can do these activities with them too, to think about this. So what do you like to learn inside of behavior analysis, outside of behavior analysis, and what's intellectually stimulating? So like in behavior analysis right now, my interest is sexuality, but I'm really into looking at functional analyses. There you go, ACT, right? So that's something to think about too. Outside of behavior analysis, like I said, I like to learn about history. I like to learn about like the environment and stuff like that and how that works. Outside of ABA yoga, I need to get back into yoga. Because my back is hurting. OBM, yeah. Focus on feedback learning, yeah, for sure. Printmaking, I see gardening, I see art, I see play, I see transition planning, I see Pilates, I see baking, painting, dancing, genealogy, jazz music. Oh my gosh, I'm a musician. I could never play jazz music. It stresses me out. Diet and nutrition, Kelly, I'm on that journey right now, and it is fascinating, completely fascinating. Philosophy. Oh, Desiree, good luck. Engage in self-care. Philosophy gets into some dark spaces. Crisis handling. Yeah. Singing, dancing, Zumba, traveling around, physical activity. That's what I'm saying. So like scuba diving, there you go. Daniela, I could see you scuba diving. That'd be great. I would love that. So nice to see you again. Sex education. Yeah. Hey, let me know. That's what I do for a living. So I'm working on that. Oh, you warmed my heart, Danielle. I appreciate you. So yeah, this is what I'm saying. It's like, so we have other interests. Isn't it beautiful to know that you're not just a behavior analyst, that you're a behavior analyst plus all these other things that make you human? We gotta foster that. And as supervisors and employees, we gotta foster that for the folks that we're supervising, that we're leading, right? Facilitating women, yeah, absolutely. Like there's a lot of things that we can do better across the board, and individually we can learn all these things, and we can bring that knowledge to our trainees, our employees, our organizations. We can do all of those things. All of those things. There are no rules for what you can learn and what you're allowed to learn. You are allowed to learn it. It's just a matter of time management more than anything, right? But we should be attending to these for the people that we're supervising too, because this kind of stuff will make it so that their work life is better, because they're not pigeonholed into learning certain things or doing certain things. They can learn more, they can grow more, they are intellectually stimulated, so they don't have to go looking anywhere else. We can do a good job fostering that for the people that we're serving. So educational well-being should account for two things, I think. And this is not necessarily like, I hear Mandy Ralston in the back of my head. I know things are not binary, but I think categorically, I think that sometimes we need to look at things that we need and things that we want, right? Necessity and passion. What do I need to learn? What do I want to learn? And from there, it's extensive, right? It's forever. Okay, so that's what when I'm working with people and I'm training people and I'm working as like supervising folks, I make sure to incorporate those things. Hey, you know what? You're going to be a BCBA. What do you need to know? You need to know how to write a behavior program, do an assessment. You need to know how to to have a conversation with families that doesn't make you sound like a jerk, right? You need to be able to do all those things. What do you want to learn? Oh, you want to learn ACT? Oh, you want to learn how to work with animals? Oh, you want to learn, you want to go dig into like the studies from the 1940s and try to find an assessment and try to revive that. Oh, you want to study, sequelics that don't exist anymore. Let's do that, right? And Zonia, yeah, Peter Gerhardt has some really good stuff. Yeah, shoot me an email if you want the sexuality stuff. I'm more than happy to do that. I'm actually probably going to do a workshop for MPG too. So you all have that as well. So when you're planning this stuff, when you're talking about this stuff, planning educational well-being, it starts at assessment. What skills do I need to maintain? And think about this for yourself. What kind of work are you doing? And why do you attend CEs? You attend CEs not just to learn new things, but to kind of make sure that you're staying sharp, right? You got to stay sharp, okay? The skills that you need to learn, PEAK, PFA, SBT, to keep up with what's going on. Also, what are you interested in learning? Like right now, I'm also on like a bent on like trauma-informed care and what that means and what that looks like and how that manifests in behavior analysis and how we do that and how we really use that and like kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of it, right? But what about other areas of practice? Behavioral gerontology. I love working with older folks and working with folks that have dementia and Alzheimer's and traumatic brain injury. I love working in that space. I need to spend some more time doing that though, right? So these could all be part of education with a sub of occupational, right? They can all kind of go together like that. But I think it's also a requirement to consider, what do you want to learn that isn't behavior analytic? When you're supervising people, make sure that they are contacting stuff that's not just behavior analysis, because students get in that. They're working in behavior analysis. They're collecting hours in behavior analysis. They're in a behavior analysis program. They are going to burn out rapidly. Okay? So give them an opportunity to learn things, set goals with them that say, hey, you know what? Read a book that is not behavior analysis. If you pick up a book that has any ABA in the title or anything like it, put it down and go read, I don't know, A Court of Thorn and Roses or whatever it is that's like in vogue right now, right? Go read some smut. Go make yourself happy, right? Do whatever it is. Do something different, right? Do something that's not behavior analysis. It's okay to do that. You are allowed to do that, right? And this is me preaching. Yeah, there you go, fourth wing, right? Whatever it is, just read something that's not Skinner talking about behavior analysis. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to tell you right now, like if you've ever read Skinner, I love his work. I love his work. I love his work. But he is not known for being a creative writer. Okay? That's all I'm saying. Okay? There's a lot of things that can make you better at ABA. You just got to balance it, right? You're allowed to be human. So I look at it like this. You're attending your needs and your wants, and it's kind of an ebb and flow circle, right? You're kind of always going back and forth. Like my wants are my preferences, my new skills, my topics of interest. My needs are my clinical, my role-specific roles. Like if I move into admin, I probably need to learn OBM, right? If I move into a consult space, then I need to learn how to consult. But maybe I want to learn how behavior analysis applies to AI too and what that looks like, right? Stuff to think about that. Stuff to think like as you're kind of unpacking this, especially with your trainees. So here are some things I like to give people okay, let me step back for a second. This is not going to be prescriptive. This is going to be descriptive, but this will be an idea or several ideas that you as a supervisor, as an employer, as somebody who is overseeing a group of people, whether they're collecting hours, whether they are part of your clinic, whether they're part of your team, whatever it is, whether they're your students, you can do all of these things and bring them into your supervision space, and it will probably make the situation better for everybody involved. Okay? So think about these things and how you can implement these things. And these are all like kind of ideas from Radical Candor. So individually, figure out what your career path is, where you want to go, where you want to end up, that kind of thing. Identify what those barriers are, stressors. They can be life stressors. They can be personal stressors, financial stressors. Identify resources to resolve said barriers. That's simple, right? As far as like your sites or your clinics and all that stuff, how well are you doing? Like, what are you doing to meet their needs? Like when you can get staff surveys, you can get that information. You can get an idea of like those regional or site values. You can provide plans, pathways for advancement, work with people to figure out what their advancement is and all that, provide opportunities for engagement. As an organization, if you're somebody who's a CEO, transparency is a huge one. We saw a couple of people earlier say transparency. Transparency is a big deal. So making sure that you're kind of transparent about what's going on, making sure systems of feedback exist and that there are feedback loops that can be bi-directional, that everybody can get feedback. It can go up the chain, it can go down the chain, it can skip people in the chain. That's perfectly acceptable. Where does my feedback go? Do my supervisors hear feedback? Is any of it implemented? And if it's not, then what's the point of doing feedback? If nobody's hearing the feedback, then what's the point? Doesn't matter. Okay? Does not matter. Okay. So those are some things to think about. But you can start doing assessments. Okay? Which is kind of fun. So some studies, I don't know if y'all know this, but if you're familiar with OBM, you know that money is not the number one reinforcer. Because I can guarantee there are people in this room that have left well-paying jobs for jobs that pay less because that job sucks so much and the next job was way better culturally, right? I see some folks raising their hands. Yeah. So money is not the number one reinforcer. Arguably, it's not even a reinforcer. You get it at the end of the week after you've already done the behavior. It's distal. It doesn't even attend to it, right? That's what I'm saying. Okay. Anyway, I'm gonna take a step back. Because I get all worked up about this. So some things that work really well, alternatives, praise, competitive data, those things, right? So what I recommend is individual assessments. Work with your people, work with your learners, spend time with them, get to know them and learn what they like. Determine pathways that make sense for them. Yeah, exactly, Molly. Yeah. It's like, I'll go somewhere else for a paycheck. I can get a paycheck at any other job. I come here for the culture, and if it's not for the culture, that's a whole problem. Hold on one second. All right. And then so then you determine these pathways, and then you have regular preference assessments for your staff, and that's really important too. So, all right. So we've got 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that I finish up the slides. We're going to get there. I want to make sure we share the last code word for today too. Yeah, and I'm going to talk about systemic issues, right? And that's exactly it. So what do they say in OBM, Kelly? A bad system will beat a good employee every single time, right? So that's something that we have to look at. So like we have to figure out as an individual, can we counterbalance that, or like eventually we got to make the system hurt, right? Hey, if the system sucks, then they'll lose people and it'll cost them a bunch of money. I imagine that money talks on some level, right? So we got to be, so if the systems are open to being addressed, that's a different thing too. Okay, so code word 2, secret word 2, secret code word keyword 2 will be water. Water, W-A-T-E-R, water. I'm staring at like 15 water bottles in front of me, so that's where that's coming from. So, all right, so it is water, the second code word. Okay, some other things you can do. Training, avoiding training when possible. Why do we avoid training? Because training is costly. You should train people and train them well to begin with, but just throwing more training at the person is very, very costly. So there's some things you could do is create job aids, create tools to make the job easier, reduce response effort for those jobs, alter the task, do instructional revision, which we're all familiar with. We all do that anyway. But all of those things are examples of things that we can do instead of training, because training might not be the solution, right? Training is an option, but it might not be the solution. It can be very costly. I don't know if y'all know this, but training a new employee for some agencies Ronan, we can't share the code, the first code word. We'll be able to watch rewatch the webinar later, and get that information. Yeah, providing in situ feedback, but like also just like kind of recognizing that like some people, like to train a new employee can cost like $10,000 for a new employee. So like training is probably not going to be the way to go in most of the situations, especially because people can do it. You got to motivate them, right? So then you do brainstorming sessions too. This is really great. Brainstorming sessions, and there are some rules that you set for this. First of all, you go into a meeting with the expectation that there are no bad ideas, okay? And you're not providing feedback in those meetings. You go in and say, okay, we're going to save feedback and we're going to save refinements for planning sessions. Right now, we're just brainstorming ideas. Throw some ideas out there, see what sticks, see what works. Record all the ideas, evaluate utility later, maybe get a committee together. Do not create action items in that meeting. You're just generating ideas. That way you get people comfortable with giving you ideas. Okay? You give people permission to share ideas with no penalty, no punishment, and you go, okay, here we are. We're going to share ideas. And then you schedule an action planning meeting after that, right? Then you do the action planning meeting. And this is something that they talk about like in more detail and radical candor, but it's actually a really powerful thing. There's also working on it Wednesdays. Working on it Wednesdays, this is like kind of like a block of time where you go, hey, bring me your pain points. Bring me the things that are a concern. You can put it on, you can call it whatever you want, right? Take action Tuesday or whatever, right? So the idea is you can go in and you can actually set up and go, okay, I'm working with you. Here are my open office hours. I'm available, not kind of available, but available. I have not blocked out anything else during that time. I am here for you and for my employees. Why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I want to attend to your pain points. I want to either get feedback on what's concerning, or I want to fix problems that you've got right now. Both are wins for you, right? Because one, I can fix a problem for you that day, okay? Or I can get feedback and I can get goals as a supervisor so that I can fix it for you later. And then if you give me goals, then I can communicate that I'm working on those, right? So working on it Wednesdays, and there's really cool. So again, you leave with the outcome, fix a problem or plan to fix a problem. There's communication and follow-up. If you have short-term goals and you fix something, tell them, hey, that thing you were concerned about, I fixed it. It's all good. Or, hey, here's the outcome of that. Let's when we get together again, let's figure out next steps. Long-term, we require multiple steps. Hey, you told me about this issue. I got it to our developers. I got it to this person. I'll let you know when we hear it's something else. I'll check in with you next week, right? So when you start communicating, just communicating is really important, okay? So it's super, super critical when you're communicating and following up with people. There you go, Kathleen. I love that. Monthly group and individual supervision. And so in your supervision meetings, you can do some of this too. And then a plan for progress. So you set up an action goal, you set up action items, you get it going, and you find out like, hey, it's not working. Okay, so what do? We scale back, right? We go, hey, you know what? This wasn't working the way that we thought it would be. So we're going to scale it back and we're going to make sure that we're hitting our marks, right? So we're going to like actually reset our goals because we weren't doing what we were needing to do, right? And that's super important too. There's a lot of things. Yeah. And there you go, Desiree. I love that. Yeah. So there's a lot of different things you can do here. So you set goals, you monitor the goals, you communicate on the goals, you change the goals as needed. Like that's perfectly okay, right? You brainstorm, you have those brainstorming sessions, you have action planning meetings, you can do all those things. So ultimately what I'm saying here is that as supervisors, we have the responsibility and we have all of the ability, at least on an individual level, to work with our trainees to do some of this stuff, which is really cool, right? We have the flexibility to do that. So I also want to point out, remember, a bad system will beat a good employee every single time. So no matter what you do as a supervisor, if you and your employee or your trainee are working inside of a system that is terrible, then that system will beat you, because that system is awful, right? Now, some other things. It's okay if your occupational, educational values don't align with your workplace every time, but you should probably evaluate that a little bit. Sometimes good, maybe preferred, but it's sometimes you got to kind of figure that out or seek that reinforcement from somewhere else. Behavior change is good, but it only maintains in a context that supports it. And that's something that's really important too. You might train somebody and your training might be really good and solid and all stuff, but like if the context isn't going to support that behavior change that you gave them, or support things like creativity or going to conferences or intellectual well-being or any of those things, then that behavior is going to get punished, and we have to be careful with that. As supervisors, we can try to control that a little bit. And just like medical well-being, when we look at occupational, educational well-being, we should look at necessity and preference. What do I need? What do I want, right? What do I got to have? What do I want to have? And that's going to give me a well-rounded picture of what I'm doing here in my practice. And I think it's okay to be creative. Like sometimes you're going to make mistakes. That is going to happen. Rewards for like risks can be really, really cool. I mean, don't take ethical risks, but like take some risks sometimes. Like every system that we work in is made up. It's all made up, folks. We're humans on a planet spinning in an eternal universe, and we're making up rules. We've made up money, right? So when you think about it, it's all made up on some level, and we have the opportunity to change that because we created it, so we can change it. That's kind of a cool thing when you think about it, when you unpack it, right? Also, maybe that's an existential thing, so be careful with that. And the key ingredient to making any change in this regard is intentional action. Start small, start individual, start with following up, start with communication, and you will make some huge changes for your folks. Okay. So I appreciate you all being here. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the Q&A real quick and see if there's anything here. Somebody asked if there was a way to get the slides. Yes, the slides are available. We will make sure you have those. If you don't get them from the folks here, you can email me and I will get those to you as well. And that is all I've got. Look at that. Look at that timing.
You did great. Great
Thank-
presentation. Okay, so for those of you who are looking to get CEUs for this presentation, you should have seen in the chat where I posted it. It is also on our ABA calendar. So I know it's getting buried in the chat. So if you can also go onto our ABA calendar to click on that link. By the end of the day today, I will also send an email to all attendees so that you don't have to worry about going to find it in the chat. But it will have a link for your CEU to take your CEU quiz. It is through Thinkific. So if you are attending one of our webinars for the first time, you'll be prompted to create a new account. If you are a returning guest, make sure you log in using the email that you previously used, just so you keep all your certificates in one spot. If you have any questions, you can email professionaldevelopment@manhattanpsychologygroup.com, and I'd be happy to help. I will post it in the chat again so that it is just at the bottom. But if you guys think of any questions for Shane after we do end this webinar, feel free to email me or him. And if you do email me, then I will be happy to connect you on with him. And again, you can email professionaldevelopment@manhattanpsychologygroup.com. But this is the end of today's presentation. So I will stay on for a couple minutes to support with any CEU questions. Shane, if you would like to stay on, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, you can sign off.
Yep, I'm gonna head out. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, MPG, for having me. Madison, this is so great.
Yes, thank you so much.
This is so cool.
This was great. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, anytime, anytime. I'll be back. I'll come hang out anytime you want.
Great. Thanks. Have fun in Florida.
For sure. Take care, everyone. See ya.